Today's tech tip is about the charging system, its basic components, how they work and what they look like, and what to check for when checking out your charging system. All Harley-Davidsons since 1985, mid-85, use what's called a stator alternator charging system. Before that, your Sportsters prior to 85 and your Big Twins prior to 1970 used a generator type charging system. Now the basic difference between the two is a generator produces DC current, an alternator produces AC current. Now your motorcycle battery is a DC battery, direct current battery. So in your later model motorcycles that produces AC current, we need to change that AC current to DC so you can use it on your motorcycle. Now how you do that is through your regulator. Your regulator / rectifier does two things. Number one, it regulates, which is obvious that it tells the stator and or generator how much charge to put in the battery. When the battery is full, the regulator stops charging, dumps that current into ground so that you don't overcharge and boil out your battery. Now, the second thing that a regulator rectifier does is it rectifies. What that means is it changes the AC current to DC current so your battery can use it. So as this is your stator. As your stator produces electricity, it goes through your rectifier, changes it to DC current, and puts it into your battery. Now your regulator also will, besides rectifying it, will regulate it and tell it when to and when not to charge. So it's very important that this little piece right here, you keep a close eye on it maintenance-wise. Now let's go back to explaining a little more about how the charging system works. This is obviously just a string of coiled copper wire wrapped around metal heads. Now how that makes electricity is you have what's called a rotor. This rotor goes over top of your stator. What the rotor consists of is a series of magnets. So when you have a series of magnets spinning over a series of coiled copper wire, that creates electricity. Now the electricity, the faster the RPMs, the more electricity it produces. We're back to the regulator telling it just how much to actually put in the battery so that when you're at high top speed, you aren't dumping huge amounts of electrical current into your battery. That's what your regulator does. Now what your regulator does when it's telling the stator to stop charging, it can't physically shut the stator off. It just has to redirect the electricity somewhere. What it does is it dumps that electricity to ground. What that means is it just internally here puts the electricity ground into the frame of your bike. Now the amperage is low enough that you obviously don't feel anything, doesn't hurt any of your electronics. But what's very important is if you ever look on the back side of your regulator rectifier, you see this little tab here, this little hole, and that's for a ground wire. That's to make sure that when you install it, you put a little ground wire from here to some solid, good ground on your bike. Most people don't do that. They just bolt this thing straight onto the frame and hope that the frame mount and the frame ground is good enough to dump the electricity. If this regulator has no place to dump the electricity because of a bad ground, it will burn itself out. You'll stop your charging system. Now when it comes to checking your charging system to see how well it's working, what you're going to do is you're going to use a multimeter on your battery. You're going to put the multimeter onto your battery at volts DC with the bike not running. And you should read in the mid-12s, 12.5, 12.6, even 12.7 for a really good, well-charged battery. Then you're going to start the motorcycle and let it idle for a second to warm up. Then you'll, while watching the multimeter, rev the bike up a little bit, and you should see that multimeter voltage, DC voltage, climb up into the mid-13s, 13.5, 6, 7, 8, the higher the RPM. And the higher the RPM, the higher the voltage should go up to about 14. It really shouldn't charge any more than 14 when the regulator should tell it that's high enough voltage, stop charging, and it should stay about anywhere from 13.8 to 14.1. That's proving that you have a good charging system. If when you start the bike that it does not climb, if it stays at the 12.5, 6, or 7, and at that level or actually goes lower, your motorcycle is not charging. You need to figure out which component of the system is not charging. Now the first step is to check your battery connections, your regulator and stator connections, and the main wire that goes from your regulator, this long wire that goes all the way from the regulator to the positive of the battery needs to have juice. So if you have a wiring problem, obviously you can fix that. If it's none of those things and it still doesn't charge, I would definitely recommend taking it to a shop that has a proper diagnostic equipment to check out your stator, your rotor, and even your regulator to see which component it is. They're relatively expensive components. You don't want to just start swapping out parts to see which is what. Now, the only difference in a generator-type charging system is that the generator does not have the stator and the rotor. This is a generator, does exactly what the name implies. It generates 12-volt DC current. So this can go directly from here to a regulator. No rectifier, it's just a regulator. And it's much simpler, and all this regulator does is tell it when to charge and not to charge. So as this generator is running, it goes to the regulator to the battery. You test it in exactly the same way I described as testing the stator type system to see if it's charging. You hook it up on the battery with the bike not running, then start the bike, rev it up, and you should charge in the same, all the numbers are the same. You should charge in the high 13s, very low 14s to show you have a good charging system. And again, if it's not charging, you can check your basic connections, but anything farther than that, you should probably get it to a shop and let them check out to see which component it is, as they are relatively expensive components.